For the first 10 years of my life, I grew up in a house with no video games. It was supposed to be good for me and help me get ahead, and perhaps in some ways it did. My free time was spent on things like reading books, writing stories, and solving puzzles. I didn't know what an internet was, and this was all fine by me really. I just didn't know what I didn't know. But this would change though once I started hanging out with friends over at their houses. There was one day where my friend Andrew told me that he got a PlayStation 2 and he wanted to show it to me. My ignorant little self went upstairs expecting to find some sort of giant device suited around playing games, similar to that of like some arcade game or machine like those old game stations that ESPN used to sell. So I was surprised to find out exactly what it was, but it made sense once he fired the thing up. It quickly became a habit that he always wanted to show off his new video games to me, and I would just kind of sit and watch. I realized really quickly that I was terrible at video games, and he would always play games like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, Madden, and eventually LEGO Star Wars. He was one of those friends who was perfectly content to just let me sit there and watch without really considering if it was boring for me. And admittedly, I didn't really mind, because whenever he did hand me the controller, I would always just play terribly, and he would always take it back shortly afterward. Needless to say, my first impression of video games wasn't all that great. It wasn't really until I visited Tim's house where I would finally understand the hype. Now, my friend Tim recently had gotten a GameCube on one of my visits, and he was much more open to, multiplayer experiences. I remember kind of dreading the idea of playing at first, because the last time I had visited him, we had just played basketball, which was much more up my alley at the time. So I told him that I was really bad at video games as a little bit of a forewarning. Tim told me that he actually had the perfect game we could play then that would make things easy for me. He then popped in his copy of Mario Kart Double Dash, told me that he would do all the driving, and I could just help him out by throwing items at the other players to help him win. Now Tim, I doubt you're watching today, but you genuinely have no idea what you started. Now, my first experience playing Mario Kart was taking on the 100cc Special Cup with him. I guess that's where he was stuck at the time because the tracks were starting to get harder. Of course, it all started with Wario Coliseum, the colossal roller coaster ride littered with boost panels and jumps everywhere, and road that constantly jumped over and under itself. It left an insane first impression on me. I remember thinking like, holy crap, is every course like this one? And well, the actual answer was no. There is only one Wario Coliseum, and I just didn't realize this at the time. But going on with the cup, Dino Dino Jungle was cool. I mean, it was a prehistoric themed course with narrow bridges where you avoid a giant dinosaur from stomping on you, and then you drive past it at the end of the track. And of course, Bowser's Castle was intimidating. It felt like this never-ending gauntlet of a dungeon topped off of a giant mech firing fireballs at you that I had to use my punches to try to help us avoid at times. And of course, Double Dash's Rainbow Road also leaves an impression. I cannot stress how perfect of a final level it is, and the upward cannon at the end felt so cool. I don't remember the exact scores that day, but I remember feeling that we weren't going to win the Grand Prix, partly because this track was just a struggle. We ended up pulling it out, which unlocked Toad and Toadette, and it felt really exciting at the time. Tim credited me for us winning because I guess he had been stuck on this cup for a while. Next up, we took on the 150cc Mushroom Cup right after with the new characters and won that too. We also hopped on Super Monkey Ball afterwards and played a side game racing mode that was also cool. But on my way home, I remember thinking about how cool I thought Double Dash and its courses were. Good news and bad news would ultimately come out of this. The good news was I discovered that I actually liked video games that day. The bad news, however, is that my first impressions set perhaps an unfair expectation. You see, I played the greatest cup of all time first. I thought this was just going to be the standard, at least as far as Final Cups went. So my expectations remained high and stayed that way for a while, because unfortunately for me, Tim would move shortly after this, and I never really got to repeat this experience. Today, I'm kind of partial to Double Dash's co-op mechanics because it offered me an on-ramp to liking video games to begin with. So later on, when I was still hanging out with Andrew, I always wanted to try new games, and I guess he also had an old Nintendo 64 in his basement that we started playing too. I don't think he had Mario Kart 64 because we never played it, but as the kid with no internet that I was at this time, I didn't even know that there were other Mario Karts. I did still find out that I had an affinity for racing games though. We played games like Wave Race, Cruisin' USA, and Hydro Thunder a bunch, and I found that I was actually able to compete with him in all those games, despite the fact that I didn't own them for myself. Now my parents and his parents were pretty close at the time, but his parents were a bit younger and I guess they were more in tune with video gaming. I of course had started talking more about games at this time, and I think they were worried about having to get me my own console at some point, and they asked his parents about it all. I assumed that his parents assured mine that there's nothing wrong with video games despite what the stories on the news really said, and before I knew it, Andrew's dad was over at my place helping my dad set up my first console ever, a hand-me-down Super Nintendo that my cousin had grown out of. And even at this time, the console was already pretty old, but I didn't really care that much. It came with Super Mario World: A Link to the Past and a bunch of sports games including the legendary Ken Griffey Jr. Presents Major League Baseball, and it was all fun. But admittedly, I was too stupid for Zelda at this time. I got casual filtered by the Donut Ghost House in Mario World, and I just wasn't really that good at the sports games yet. I remember actually destroying Andrew at baseball. For once I had an even playing field with him, just equally not knowing how to play a game, and I figured out a winning strategy. But when I tried it against the computer later, well, I got cooked. Difficulty in these games didn't mess around back in the day. But soon after this all, Andrew would one-up me again. I went over to his place one day and he introduced me to a brand new handheld console that he had got for Christmas. The all-new Nintendo DS, alongside a new racing game that I would absolutely fall in love with. And you guys already know what game I'm talking about. This, of course, was the legendary Ridge Racer DS. Now, this game was awesome. We unfortunately couldn't compete against each other because, he is the only one that had a console, but we took turns playing the levels trying to win and unlock the next set of them. The game was super hard to be honest, but for whatever reason, it really resonated with me, and the experience made me want to get a DS of my own so we could play together. So after a few more months rolled around, my birthday came and I got a DS, and it was my first original gaming console that was, well, modern. And it came with my own copy of Ridge Racer alongside Super Mario 64 DS and some Spider-Man game. Unfortunately, by this point though, Andrew did not really care about Ridge Racer anymore, but it didn't matter to me because I no longer had to really rely on him to get to play it. Now, it kind of feels weird in hindsight that the DS was my first experience owning like a modern console, really. It's not that it doesn't make sense because handheld consoles typically are good first consoles to own, but the DS really only came out like 3 years after the Game Boy Advance. Most people who were around for the DS launch had been part of the GBA era, and that just was not me. As a result, I really had no idea how any of it all worked. I took for granted that I had a 3D Mario game on a handheld console. I thought it had always just been like this. Furthermore, the DS had a bunch of games that also released on the GameCube. I had a bunch of Madden games on my DS, for instance. There were of course third-party games too, like Shrek Smash and Crash Racing, which was literally on all 3 of the consoles at the time. And I thought that it was like the same for every console across the board. I didn't know that lots of these third-party games were entirely different depending on what console you got them on. I just thought that you could get the exact same game on any console, really. So one day when my mom had dragged me to Walmart, I noticed that they had a GameCube kiosk that allowed for people to play the demo of the recently released Mario Superstar Baseball. Now, I was a pretty big baseball fan as a kid. I got to play for like 10 minutes before being forced to leave to go do other errands, but I immediately came to the conclusion that this was a game that I had to have. Now, obviously at the time, I did not have a GameCube, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. I let my mom know though, and asked if she could pick it up for me, but for the DS, not the GameCube. And she said sure. Eventually one day that fall, she went to the local game store while out shopping, and she came home and told me that the people at the counter said that this was a GameCube exclusive, and instead they recommended another game to me that she bought instead. That game was Mario Kart DS. And in that moment I was like, wait, this is even better. Looking back, I questioned why I had never asked for Mario Kart myself. I don't remember if I just didn't remember the name, but I was pretty attentive to detail even at a young age, so I doubt that this was the case. Maybe it was because Mario Superstar Baseball was advertised as a new game at Walmart, so I assumed that because the DS was out, it would be there too. That feels likely. But of course, when I popped the game in, I was just kind of expecting Double Dash, but on my DS. It turned out to just be a different game with different tracks, but that was okay with me. I was young enough still where I just played whatever was in front of me. I didn't really get to choose that much, and I was happy to just get anything new. And I remember my very first race was on Donut Plains 1 in the Banana Cup, and I had no idea how to use items, funnily enough. Now remember, when I was playing Double Dash, I had just used the A button to use items since I wasn't driving. But obviously, I knew I had to use A to accelerate here. So what did I do? Well, I didn't have the internet at the time, so I busted out the game manual and found out that way. Now, Mario Kart DS was magical. The game just had everything I could possibly ask for. There were tons of modes and so many options too. You could even make a personal logo for your kart, and there were tons of tracks as well, and though none quite stacked up to Wario Coliseum in my eyes, there were many that came somewhat close. My favorite tracks initially were Wario Stadium, Rainbow Road, Waluigi Pinball, and GBA Bowser Castle 2. And I almost wonder when looking back, if I just liked all the tracks reminiscent of the ones in the Double Dash Special Cup. For the record, I've always really been obsessed with track lists and rankings and all that stuff. Back before I had internet access and long before I ever made videos. I did a lot of the same stuff just on paper and in journals that I do now. Believe it or not, I actually found some of those old notebooks recently, and here's a track list I think I made when I was 12 after Mario Kart Wii was out. I still see that some of these takes aged kinda well. Some definitely did not, however, though. I definitely changed my mind a lot back then, I'll just say that. Now, despite its reputation, Mario Kart DS was actually incredibly friendly to beginners. Ridge Racer was always a bit hard to control, and even still today, I can't beat some of its final challenges. But in Mario Kart DS, vehicles like the Egg 1 made every challenge in the game possible, and it didn't even need to drift to be more than usable. Mario Kart DS was just the first game where I never really got stuck. It felt like the first game I ever owned where I could just play it endlessly. But then one day it finally stumped me. Now, I know a lot of people rightfully shout out mission mode when talking about this game and its features, and it's the kind of single player content we really need back in this series, to be honest, but it might not get enough credit for its ability to actually teach you strategies. Sometimes this could come in the form of pointing out shortcuts or teaching you about that one item box on DK Pass, but for me, it taught me how to become good at the game. When I first played, I had no idea what a power slide boost was, so I had to figure it out in the only way I knew how. By searching for it in the game manual, of course. Turns out the manual once again had the answers. So yeah, it turned out that the 4 mini turbo boost mission was really easy. I mean, I know they were supposed to be for turns, but I could fit in like 20 of them if I really tried. And that's when it occurred to me. Mini turbos are fast. Why wouldn't I want to do as many as humanly possible? So yeah, snaking was a very controversial subject surrounding Mario Kart DS. For many, it ruined the purpose of the game. And for me, I started doing it before I even knew what it was called. Because from my perspective, it was a natural progression. Intuitive even. For me, it sped the game up, and it made time trials harder, but much more interesting. It was the tech that made the game impossible to put down, at least until my hands cramped. But to me, I had effectively discovered an endless game. There was always an improvement to be had. This was the game that really helped me realize I had a competitive player's mindset. It was something that just took me a while to realize though. But what made me realize that was when I finally played against other people. I may have been one of the first people to actually get a DS, but everyone I knew would eventually follow up. And this game was a multiplayer staple amongst everybody. I still remember field trips back in elementary school where my friends and peers would play this game, and I thought initially that it was going to be an awesome time for me. Beforehand, a lot of kids would brag about how good they were, and I was excited for the challenge, but predictably, once the races began, I realized that I had become so much faster than everyone else that they might as well have just been CPUs. It was for this reason that I fell in love with time trialing, because I always knew my own ghost would present a challenge. Now, the reaction to me winning these local races was not necessarily hostile. Many people watched me with fascination and couldn't even believe their eyes. They were often just amazed. And I've jokingly told people before that I was banned from Mario Kart DS lobbies on the school bus before, but that was a little bit of an over-exaggeration. I just quickly realized that there wasn't really much of a purpose in me playing. If I played and tried, it would just effectively prevent other people from being able to win, and the only way it could even be interesting was if I really wasn't trying at all, and that just wasn't fun. In some ways, I questioned if my own love for the game prevented me from being able to enjoy these experiences. My friend Jack was just about the only person who played this game with me, perhaps because like me, he didn't have any of the modern home consoles at the time. I taught him how to snake a little bit, but still even with it, he was substantially behind me in my level. To get him to play, I would always let him choose the tracks. His favorite track in the game was Airship Fortress, so I got used to playing it a lot, and I didn't really realize it at first. But he had phenomenal taste, because as we kept playing, this track would actually become my favorite in the game and one of my favorite courses of all time. Now, it was nice to have somebody that played with me, but I always did question if, he had as much fun as I did. I always kind of just rationalized that nobody really liked the game as much as I did. Because if they did, I just felt like, wouldn't they self-teach themselves the advanced tech as well? Wouldn't they want to practice in the same way as me? I mean, snaking wasn't exactly groundbreaking from my perspective. It felt obvious even. And while I realized that maybe I was just unique in this regard and that this wasn't really obvious to most people, I felt at the time that others probably just didn't care in the same way as me. So it was a weird spot to be in. Because even today, the game is actually still refreshing to me. I find that whenever I pick it up again, it still feels relatively new in ways that every Mario Kart game after just doesn't. I credit it entirely to how the game works. It's super fast paced with vehicles that give you so much control and versatility. There's never a moment where you're only holding A. To me, it feels like, dare I say it, the melee of Mario Kart. The unfortunate issue with this all is that a game can truly have perfect mechanics that resonate greatly with you, but it does not matter if there is no way to properly play it. What good is a multiplayer game if there's nobody that can challenge you? Now, eventually I would figure out how to play online. And don't snitch on me, but I discovered that I could use my neighbor's unlocked router in order to do this. This was really the most fun I had ever had on the game. It felt like my time trialing finally paid off, but even still, there were limitations. The online mode was just 100cc only with 4 players maximum, littered with rage quits and missing a lot of my favorite tracks in the game. Still, it was better than nothing. I spent a lot of the time period after this catching up on the older Mario Kart games. I eventually got a GameCube alongside Mario Superstar Baseball, of course, but I did pick up Double Dash one day as well. And perhaps ironically, my mom questioned why I would want it since she had gotten it for me somewhat recently still. But by this point in time, I had learned the differences. And getting to play Double Dash and Mario Superstar Baseball was a massive deal to me still, because these were the 2 games that I was also just most intrigued by that I could never really have before this point. I followed this up by striking a trade with my friend Andrew, a different Andrew that is, my only close friend who I believe had a Super Nintendo as well. I offered up a Link to the Past for Super Mario Kart, and I definitely got robbed blind with this move, but the trade still made sense for me at the time. I didn't quite love SMK, but I still enjoyed playing through it, and I would later pick up a Link to the Past on my Wii and properly play through it then, but I just wasn't ready for it at this age. My original DS was also able to play Super Circuit. I remember buying the game in the mid-2000s, years after it came out, and I remember the cashier questioning why. It was the worst Mario Kart game in his mind, and there were newer ones, but he did not understand that I was on a quest to play them all. And finally, I bought my own used Nintendo 64 for just $25 with the intent of getting to play Mario Kart 64 alongside it. The problem was, the store didn't have the game, just the console. I ended up striking a trade with a different friend named Cruz. This time I offered multiple games and he ended up wanting Yoshi's Island for the SNES. Weirdly, I don't think he had a Super Nintendo, but he also seemed to be a bit of a collecting type. I'm not really sure, but this trade worked out better for me because I had also picked up the Game Boy Advance version of Yoshi's Island anyway after learning that my DS could play GBA games months before. MK64 was not my favorite game, but for a while I felt like it had my favorite tracks in the series, largely due to how much I liked its raceways in particular as opposed to the other circuit tracks of the series. Overall though, I realized that despite my initial Double Dash nostalgia, that Mario Kart DS was actually my favorite of the bunch. I appreciated the other games, but DS was a celebration of the series in many ways, having tracks from all the previous games and being the only one with online play. And to me, it almost felt like a rightful conclusion to the whole series. It was nice for me to go back and experience the rest of the games, of course, but in my mind, this was the ultimate package. Then, one day at the school gymnasium, my friend Andrew, the first one in the story again, told me that they were developing a new Mario Kart on the Wii. Now, throughout this whole MK retrospective journey I was on, the Wii had actually released already at this time. I wanted one badly too, because Wii Sports actually just had the most insane aura at the time, but it was impossible to find Wiis on store shelves at this time. My family was not internet savvy at all either, so the idea of ordering online was just foreign to us. But at the time, I remember just doubting my friend initially. I remember telling him why would they make a new one? They literally made the perfect Mario Kart game already. It didn't make sense to me. Of course, at this age, I didn't know about the old capitalism machine at the time, nor was I even really aware of the true extent of the snaking hatred. A new Mario Kart was obviously necessary. I just was not someone who really needed it. What I did need, though, was Wii Sports. I was tired of only getting to play it at friends' houses. So April 2008 rolled around, and the good news finally hit. My aunts from all the way across the state found a Wii somewhere and knew I had wanted one for a long time, and she secured it for me, and before I knew it, I finally had access to Wii Sports. I played it endlessly for like a week, a lot in that first month. But then I realized that like most other games, there's only so much that it really could offer. I feel like when you have to play a game over at a friend's house, you get enough of a taste of the fun, but without the ability to truly experience what the game has to offer, and it always leaves you wanting more. But finally, I had gotten my fill with Wii Sports, and the Wii was cool and awesome, but it was time to go back to Mario Kart DS now. At least, that's what I ordinarily would have done. Now, I don't remember the exact timeline of everything, but I was at a friend's birthday party one weekend at a bowling alley right next to an old Game Crazy store, the game store that I used to go to. When leaving, I convinced my parents to stop by just because I wanted to find some new games for my Wii. Now, we had the internet at this time, but I didn't have my own personal laptop or anything, nor did I really know how any of it worked. So every time I went to the game store, I didn't know what might be in store for me. However, this time, the recently released Mario Kart Wii was being heavily advertised and we could see logos for the game on the windows before even entering. I was stunned when pulling up, because I knew what I wanted already. Safe to say, the visit didn't last very long. The second we got in, I got my copy of the game and we were out the door. I didn't even care about the rest of the catalog. I just knew I needed to get home and play this game. So I started off with the Banana Cup again. It meant I would have to play my 2 least favorite tracks in the game first, but it also meant that I'd get to play Waluigi Stadium, one of my favorite tracks of all time. I remember my parents watching me play. They were never once to be intrigued by video games, but they were fascinated by the Wii wheel. Wii Sports had a similar effect on them, and I think that the practicality and intuitiveness for the older generations is what made these games and the Wii itself such a huge ordeal to begin with. Now, unfortunately for me, my neighbor's Wi-Fi was too far away from my console for me to play online. I still didn't understand how any of this worked really. The router appeared as an unlocked router with 0 signal, and another one appeared on screen too with green bars, but it was unfortunately locked up, so I could not enter. So during the first few months of Mario Kart Wii, I was completely clueless. I thought I had beaten the world record on multiple tracks because I beat the default world record times on tracks like Mushroom Gorge and Toad's Factory, but those times obviously weren't updating without internet access. But not only was I not connecting in-game, I also just wasn't connecting with this game on the same level that I had with Mario Kart DS. Now, I was a kart player and a Wii wheeler to start, and they had obviously removed snaking. It didn't stop me from beating the game easily and unlocking everything, but playing time trials after it all just didn't hit the same. Eventually I dropped the Wii wheel in favor of the GameCube controller because I felt inconsistent with the wheel, but that only did so much because the mechanics still felt limited in comparison. Now, I had actually gotten the Mario Kart Wii guidebook with the game, and I remember trying to beat all of their Ghost of a Chance times. These times were all better than the Fast Staff Ghost in-game. I noticed that they often were using a bike called the Flame Runner, so I tried it out one day. The game forces you to try bikes on your initial 100cc playthrough, and I'm pretty sure I'd just used the standard bike at that point and didn't think much of it. But when I tried drifting with the Flame Runner at first, I went immediately into the wall, because this drifting was alien to me. I tried just practicing on the Luigi circuit at first. I almost wanted to quit because I just kept going into the off-road, but eventually I got the hang of it and I realized why the bike was so strong. Shortly after, time trials started becoming fun again, but admittedly, my TT era on Mario Kart Wii didn't last all that long after still. This was because one day, something revolutionary happened. I walked past a piece of paper on the dining room table that had a name that I recognized. This wasn't the name of some person or place, it was an SSID. The SSID that I had always seen next to that locked green bar connection on the DS and Wii Wi-Fi menus. And there was a password underneath. This might be like the stupidest, life-changing moment possible, but the point is, I suddenly understood how the internet works. I think for a year of my life, I thought my neighbor's router was like some kind of public server that anyone could access, and my own home router was like some premium access for the elites of the world. And yes, this was the same logic that came from like a kid that figured out snaking on his own, but it is what it is. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. But everything started to make sense. I realized why I could only play like in one room of my house on Mario Kart DS and why I couldn't play Wii on the public neighbor Wi-Fi server. But anyways, I immediately went downstairs upon realizing this to my setup, entered the password of the router, and just like that, I was on the so-called premium server. And what I found out was that Mario Kart Wii Online was insane. It fixed practically every problem with Mario Kart DS Online, perhaps to a degree that I was uncomfortable with. Yes, there were 12-player races. Every track was allowed. There were even 150cc races. But I also realized something else quickly, and that was that the game was, well, unserious. Now, Mario Kart Wii's reputation at the time was that it was the most chaotic game in the series, easily. In hindsight, I'm not actually sure if it was compared to Double Dash, but the point is, you had more lightning bolts and blue shells than ever before, the most powerful bullet bill ever, new items like the Mega Mushroom, an additional shock dodging item, the POW, an item that impacts a large total of the room all at once, and the Thundercloud, an item that effectively felt like a race-ending item to any unfortunate soul who got stuck with it. I found that while my time trialing efforts mattered on Mario Kart Wii, that they mattered way less than in DS. And in Mario Kart DS, if I ever lost, it was almost always to somebody around my skill level. But in this game, there were often races where I would just get last despite clearly being the best player in the lobby. And I didn't really know what to think about this. I know many people would call Mario Kart Wii the Melee of this series, and that's a whole different video that I want to tackle in the future, but at this time, it felt very much to me like how Brawl felt to Melee players. It was clearly designed to be more casual than Mario Kart DS, and the removal of snaking made it so that there was less a skilled player could do to break away from a more casual player. There were many moments in Mario Kart Wii where the optimal input was no input, and that was almost never the case when I played DS. So I decided that I wanted to continue playing both. I realized that they both had different strengths and weaknesses, and I still liked Mario Kart Wii a lot after all. I wasn't really much of an analyst at the time, and I've always enjoyed all the games in the series for what they were, and Mario Kart Wii and its bikes were very cool and unique still. But I rationalized that I was simply a better Mario Kart DS player than I was a Mario Kart Wii player at the time, and I wanted to continue leaning into what I was good at. Now also around this time, Super Smash Bros. Brawl came out. I was of course not a competitive Smash player, so despite growing up with Melee, I was not very critical of Brawl either. To me and my friends, Brawl was just awesome. Final Smashes were cool, and it even had more characters, a stage builder, and of course the Subspace Emissary. But something interesting happened here, because growing up, Melee was always a more played multiplayer game amongst my friend group than Mario Kart, and I really did prefer it that way. The competition was more balanced and fun for everyone. But in the Wii era, a little bit of a shift happened. And it's not because Brawl was worse than Melee from our eyes, it was just that things were different now. Brawl was still the preferred offline game in our friend group, much like Melee. But because the Wii had online play, and Brawl's online was terrible, Mario Kart Wii got more playtime from all of us. My friends and I frequently played it in the evenings when everybody was in for the night and chose it intentionally over Brawl as well. And it wasn't because I pestered them to play Mario Kart with me either. So despite my initial impressions of Mario Kart Wii, it did something for me that DS was never able to do, and that was actually motivate some of my friends to want to play it. I was still clearly the best player amongst this friend group, but because of the nature of the game, I was no longer unbeatable, and I no longer had to not try in the matches. And this created a positive feedback loop in a sense. Because the barrier to entry for becoming a good player was lower, it was more accessible to my friends, I noticed that they started caring about improving too because actual goals and achievements felt more doable for them. The cool part about all of this is that improvements started becoming collaborative. I gave them all tips on how to improve, and they started going for star ranks to flex online and even started time trialing as well. We sent ghosts to each other, and some of them would even start downloading world record ghosts as well. And when we worldwided, I remember really wanting to see them all succeed against the random people that we didn't know. Some of them would eventually crack the 9,000 VR range, which was pretty impressive in my mind. Now, the next logical step to all of this feels so obvious in hindsight, but back then things were simpler. We played for fun, and not everything necessarily had some grander purpose. Of course, we were still attentive to the types of people we raced online. We noticed a link between the best players in our worldwide races and the players we frequently saw on the time trial leaderboards. All of the best players had some kind of prefix to their online name. I was of course curious about all of this, and so I started researching it. And perhaps this was one of the first things I ever Googled. But eventually I found the answer. These prefixes were known as clan tags, and it was a way for players to express which clan or team that they were a part of. This led me down the rabbit hole of discovering the online Mario Kart community and all it entailed. I learned about clan wars, matches taking place between two different teams, and how it was the preferred way to play online amongst top players, and I so wanted in on this. I was a big fan of traditional team sports like basketball, football, and baseball, and the idea of 5 vs 5 or 6 vs 6 sounded so much more interesting than free-for-all. One morning in January of 2009, I was telling my friends Zach and Brandon about these clans. Of course, at this time, none of us were online or part of the community, and specifically, I wasn't really supposed to be on forums and stuff because I was still young. But regardless of that, both Zach and Brandon said we should make our own team. This was of course exciting for me because even if I knew I wasn't going to be playing online in the community for a while, I still wished I could be in a team. And what better way was there to do it than play with people that you already know? And even if we didn't do any matches or anything, the idea of having teammates and a team tag felt like something cool to flaunt during online races. And of course, it also reassured me that my friends actually liked this game and that we'd get to continue playing together into the near future. Before I could even start to brainstorm an idea for like a team name and tag, Brandon suggested that our team should be called HD, and Zach almost immediately gave a seal of approval liking the tag. So I guess even if I had any other ideas, I was already outnumbered. So for me, I was down. I just wanted to play after all. And we told our other active friends at lunch, Matt and Spencer was down with it too, and Matt was a little bit hesitant. But regardless, the first 4 HD members then went home that night, made some new Miis with the new tag, and we were off to the races. Now, I don't know why the tag HD was chosen. It was around this time that high-definition TVs were actually becoming a popular thing that ordinary people had access to, but I think I discovered the reason soon enough. The top time trialer of the time was named Brendan, and a team called Star Dashers. He was just on every leaderboard, it felt like. Brendan was pretty notorious for using some pretty crazy symbols in his name, like there'd be a 3 for an E, an @ for an A, all that stuff. And his team tag was SD at the time. And I know the team name did not stand for standard definition, but that didn't really matter to Brandon. That evening, he messaged me through the Wii message board with a new me titled This. All the goofy symbols in place just like that, asking me if he thought anyone would get him confused with Brendan. And I think perhaps he just wanted to match the GOAT himself. Later that week, Matt would decide to join in on the activities as the final member of the original 5 team members. I think he was not a big fan of the name, to be honest, but we were starting to organize our own room races and time trial challenges together without him, where I made leaderboards and points systems and all that. And Matt was probably the second best player of our group, and I think he wanted to show it. So he was in. The 5 of us eventually tried recruiting some other kids around school that summer to the team, including the very same Andrew who first introduced me to gaming to begin with. But after a while, the interest just kind of died out. Modern Warfare 2 was about to come out around this time, and people were moving on to the PS3, Xbox 360, all that stuff, and that became the big new release that everyone really wanted to play instead. It was becoming evident that Nintendo wasn't going to have another year like 2008 when it came to multiplayer games again, so it was time to move on for a lot of people. Realistically speaking, it was a little sad to me, but I was just happy to have this year, really. This was the most fun I've had playing video games in my upbringing, even if ultimately all I really did was time trial and worldwide with friends, but I think I was just happy to have people to play with. That fall, Matt and I decided to make a leap into the online community with the intention of finding new people to play with. And we did. HG was of course a very weak team at the time, relatively speaking, never really reaching the heights of our standard definition counterparts, but Matt and I were finally able to play some real matches against other teams, and we even won a few of them, which was cool. A few months into it, our team qualified to be moved over to the Veteran Clan section on the first anniversary of our team, which was our original goal to begin with. It had meant that our team made it, and that our project was officially a real success. Now, Matt would eventually phase out of playing Mario Kart 2, just like the rest of my friends had. We still played it casually together on occasion in recent years, and we still even have a big Mario Superstar Baseball rivalry going. Every time we hang out, which is rarer these days, we try to run a match still. Admittedly, he's been getting the better of me recently, so a strategic change might have to be in order and looked into soon. But when he was the last friend of mine that stopped playing Mario Kart Wii, I realized it was okay, because the team that I originally just made with my 6th grade friends had turned into a group of online friends that I could play with. This was in many ways kind of a relief for me. Even if a lot of my friends grew out of wanting to play Mario Kart and all that, because of the thing that we all created together, I kind of had the opportunity to meet new people that were like-minded to me to be the next members. And having new people like this was something I really never actually experienced in my local community. I was obviously a bit of an outlier growing up. In a lot of ways, hyperfixation on a specific game felt like a defect at the time, and sometimes I even felt a sense of shame about it, because it made me different than others. Since then, I've learned to appreciate casual enjoyment of the games I love. I've realized that there are plenty of other games I enjoy only at the casual level as well. I realize that having specific unshared interests in many ways makes you unique compared to the rest of the population, and that isn't something to be ashamed about, it's something to celebrate. Because I think about the people who do content for other games and topics that I'm loosely interested in, and I appreciate those topics because they teach me things I would have never found out on my own. And these things are not really possible without people that are super interested in stuff. And the way it starts actually is through casual interest as well. Anyways though, it's fun to revisit my upbringing as a gamer, and this is something I feel like I've never really talked about or shared. Back when I was younger, I truly had no idea what I was or what I was doing, and it feels like today everything kind of just happened by accident. But the resulting chapter has led me to new lifelong friendships, and was perhaps the perfect transition from my earlier years. When it comes to my history in the online Mario Kart community, everything is much more well documented than the origin story stuff, and maybe it is worth talking about in a follow-up video perhaps, if people are interested in more videos like this, that is. But the significance of this newer era wasn't the tournaments I played in or hosted, or the future success of my team and my future teammates. It was that I gotta find a place full of people just like me, and I gotta realize that even if you have an interest that is not super common, there likely are people out in the world that do share it with you, and it's only really a matter of finding them. So to all the people out there listening to this video, whether you all fit into this category or just the people who are interested in hearing other perspectives, just know that I appreciate you all. And if any of you have any interesting stories to share, feel free to leave them in the comments if you have the time. I'm sure there's some of you out there with similar or even wildly different experiences, and I'll be curious to hear them. But with that, this one's a wrap. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.